What is a guided reading group? Let's start by discussing what is a guided reading group. The guided reading group is a method by which small groups of students with similar reading abilities are grouped together. Now we're talking about a group of 4 to 6 children, ideally no more than 6. The goal here is for the teacher to work with students directly as opposed to teaching a whole class, where the range of student abilities differ drastically. Guided reading works off a leveling system that labels books A to Z, with A being the easiest and Z the hardest. Students are supported in the small group approach and challenged to be problem solvers. More on this in just a moment. Welcome to episode 65 of the Teacher Rockstar podcast, a place where tips and strategies critical to the new teacher are discussed. I'm your host, Steve Hiles, and in today's episode, I want to talk about creating effective guided reading groups. But before we dive right in, here's a word from our sponsor. Imagine having access to educational products, instructional videos, top-rated teacher podcasts, and articles worth over $1,000 for just pennies a day. Wouldn't that be awesome? And you know what the best part is? You get a free 7-day trial. So what do you have to lose? Go check it out. Take a look around. Go to myteachermembership.com. That's myteachermembership.com. I will be adding more products each and every month, and you're going to love being part of this teacher membership community. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about forming groups for guided reading. Forming groups for guided reading, like I stated at the beginning of this podcast, children are grouped together based upon similar learning needs and process text at about the same level. Also, you want to make sure to keep students within 1 to 2 levels of each other. Okay? Now, I'm not going to say that that's the only way to create guided reading groups, okay? There may be times that you group kids based upon mixed abilities, based upon a common learning need. For example, how to read tables and charts. One thing to take into consideration is that guided reading groups are not set in stone. By that I mean groups should remain fluid, okay? Very important, whereby students can move in and out of groups as appropriate. When it comes to forming your guided reading groups, setting up and grouping your kids are critical elements of a successful guided reading experience. Now let's talk about how to set up your guided reading groups. When you're in the process of grouping your students, it's always best to use more than one type of assessment to really get a good, accurate picture of the student. It would be prudent to use several sources of assessment information. For instance, running records, DIBELS testing, fluency testing, just to name a few. Once you've completed your assessments and determined which students will go into what group, you'll want to set up some type of organizational system to track progress. What I used in my classroom were tubs that I purchased from Dollar Tree and placed the children's names on cardstock, which I then laminated and hot glued on the front of the tub. In this way, students knew what guided reading group they were assigned to. Now, before we continue, we're going to break for a word from our sponsor. Would you like to supercharge your classroom management skills? Well, if you're a first-year teacher, a student teacher, maybe you're a teacher returning back into the classroom, the Teacher Rockstar Academy course is for you. Gain the confidence, the skills you'll need to crush it on day one and beyond. So invest in yourself and enroll now at teacherrockstaracademy.com. That's teacherrockstaracademy.com. I promise you that this will be a transformational experience. Okay, let's continue. Now we're going to turn our attention to planning a guided reading group. What I would typically do first with my group is take a few minutes to talk about the pictures, bold-faced words, the text, and make predictions about the text. Then I'd also remind students to use the strategies that were previously discussed during our mini lesson that morning. Then I would have students independently read the text, at which time I would select a student at random so that they could whisper read a portion of the text to me. Lastly, I would check for comprehension and what strategy or strategies that they use during their reading. Okay, let's move on to selecting texts for guided reading. First, you want to select a book that is appropriate for that specific guided reading group, but enjoyable as well. The reading should be purposeful. Now, what I mean by that is simply that there is a specific reason why you are reading that book. Secondly, remember that the purpose for reading a book is not to learn more about reading. Again, the purpose must be authentic. Perhaps you're studying a certain genre, like biography, or you're reading an informational text. Finally, the text must be engaging for the students. If not, then it's really, in my view, a waste of time. Now, when you get a moment, for more information regarding guided reading groups, you will want to check out Fontes and Pinnell's book, Guiding Readers and Writers. It's a plethora of information that you will find extremely valuable. So I highly recommend this. Well, this brings us to the end of this episode. Hope you found some golden nuggets that you'll be able to use in your classroom. I want to thank you for listening to the Teacher Rockstar podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hiles. Hope you've enjoyed listening to these tips and strategies regarding creating effective guided reading groups. When you get a moment, visit my blog and subscribe to my newsletter for the latest educational research, best practices, and unadvertised free bonuses. Simply go to stevesclassroomresources.blogspot.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us at the Teacher Rockstar Podcast. And if you'd like to support us, please feel free to share our podcast with others. That would be totally awesome. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. That certainly would be appreciated. Thanks again, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. And remember, my friend, you got this.